Second Wind, Chapter 1, A Return to the Roots. George Michaels sat comfortably in his armchair in the living room, looking at the old photographs displayed on the shelves. Each photo held a memory, a life story. Pictures with his children, vacations, business successes, all reminded him of days when every day was filled with purpose and progress. George had retired 5 years ago. He had spent most of his life building and running a successful company, which he had founded in his 30s. Back then, his life was full of meetings, travel, new projects, and incredible opportunities. But after selling the company and stepping away from his career, life slowed down, becoming a monotonous stream of quiet days. One evening, while sitting at his desk, George happened to open an old email account he hadn't checked in years. Curious, he sifted through spam and advertisements until one email caught his eye. An invitation to apply for an internship at a startup that had recently gained attention in the business community. To his surprise, the startup had been built on the foundation of his former company, now led by a young and ambitious woman named Sarah Jones. The name seemed vaguely familiar to George, but he couldn't quite place it. He smiled at the thought of the irony, a former CEO returning to his old company as an intern. This idea intrigued him. The notion of re-entering the business world, even at such a different level, seemed both amusing and appealing. It could be a great way to break the monotony and perhaps bring something new into his life. The next day, without telling his wife, George submitted an application for the internship. He knew this decision might surprise and even amuse those who remembered him as a successful businessman. But the more he thought about it, the clearer it became. He needed a new challenge, a new adventure. Something that would give him that second wind he had been longing for. A few days later, George received a reply. Sarah Jones personally invited him to an interview. He couldn't help but smile, imagining Sarah's reaction when she saw him. But instead of feeling anxious or unsure, he felt excitement, the kind of excitement that heralds the start of something new. The day of the interview arrived. George put on his best suit, the same one he used to wear to important meetings. He looked as though he was heading to crucial negotiations, not to an interview for an internship. The nervousness in his chest was palpable, but it was a pleasant nervousness, one that signaled the beginning of something new. Gathering his thoughts, he grabbed his old briefcase and set off to embark on a new chapter of his life. Chapter 2, First Steps. The office George entered was vastly different from the ones where he had spent most of his career. The space was open and bright, with high ceilings, modern glass partitions, and vibrant accents in the interior. Young employees in jeans and t-shirts sat at their desks, engrossed in work or engaged in animated discussions. For George, it was like stepping into a different era, even though only a few years had passed since he left the business world. He approached the reception desk, where a friendly young woman with bright hair and a warm smile greeted him. "Good morning. How can I help you?" she asked cheerfully. "Good morning," George replied, slightly taken aback by the informality. "I'm here for an interview with Sarah Jones. My name is George Michaels." The woman's eyes lit up with recognition. "Oh, Mr. Michaels! Sarah is expecting you. Please follow me." She led him through a maze of workstations and meeting rooms. George couldn't help but notice the curious glances from the employees, undoubtedly surprised to see a man with gray hair in their midst. After all, it wasn't every day that an intern with such a distinguished background walked through the door. The receptionist guided him to a glass-walled conference room, where Sarah sat at a table, absorbed in her work. George wondered if she would remember him. As they entered, Sarah looked up from her laptop and smiled. "George Michaels!" she exclaimed, standing up to shake his hand. "It's so great to see you. Please, have a seat." She looked exactly as George had imagined, young, energetic, with a confident gaze. But there was a warmth in her eyes that immediately put him at ease. "Thank you, Sarah," George replied as he took a seat across from her. "I must admit, I was surprised when I saw the internship invitation. It's not every day a former CEO applies for such a position." Sarah laughed lightly. "It was an unexpected decision on our part," she admitted. "But when I learned that you were interested in our company, I realized this was a unique opportunity. We can learn so much from each other." George felt the tension in his shoulders begin to ease. He knew this conversation would determine much. not only his role in the company, but also whether he could regain the sense of purpose he had been missing. "I understand I may not be the typical candidate for this role," George began, choosing his words carefully. "But I believe I can bring something valuable to your team. Experience is not just about the years you've worked. It's about seeing the bigger picture, anticipating risks, and understanding what's needed for long-term success." Sarah listened intently, nodding in agreement. "That's exactly what we need," she said. "I'd like you to help us take a step back and review our processes and projects from a fresh perspective. We're growing quickly, and it can be challenging to keep everything under control. Your experience would be invaluable." Their conversation continued for some time. Sarah asked George about his past experiences, how he viewed the modern business landscape, and what ideas he had for the company. In turn, she shared her vision for the future of the company and the challenges she had faced. When the interview concluded, George felt confident. He knew this wouldn't be easy. He would have to learn many new things and adapt to a different corporate culture. But he also knew that an exciting journey awaited him, one that could bring back the sense of significance and energy he had been searching for. "Welcome to the team, George," Sarah said, extending her hand. "I'm sure this will be the start of a great partnership." George shook her hand firmly, feeling the long-forgotten joy of beginning something new. Chapter 3. Meeting the new team. The next morning, George Michaels felt a familiar excitement as he prepared for his first full day at the company. Once again, he donned his suit, though he noted that many employees in the office seemed to prefer a more casual dress code. Despite this, he decided to stick with his traditional style, as it made him feel most confident. As George entered the office, he was met by Thomas Green, a young software developer who had been assigned by Sarah to show George around and help him get acclimated. Thomas was clearly younger than George, probably by half, and eyed him with a mix of curiosity and skepticism before extending his hand. "Hi, George," Thomas said, his tone struggling to hide his surprise. "I'm Thomas, one of the lead developers here. Sarah asked me to introduce you to our current projects in the team." "Nice to meet you, Thomas," George replied, shaking the young man's hand. "I'm glad to be here and ready to learn everything you can show me." Thomas nodded slightly, but George could sense a hint of skepticism in his tone. He knew he had to earn the respect of his colleagues, and he was ready for that challenge. Thomas led him through the office, explaining the different departments and their roles. George listened carefully, asking questions and taking notes. He was interested in every detail, from product development to marketing strategies. Though much of it was new to him, he tried to grasp the core concepts and see where his experience could be useful. When they reached Sarah's workspace, she was in the middle of a discussion with a group of employees. Upon seeing George, she paused and smiled. "How's your first day going, George?" she asked warmly. "Very interesting," he replied with a nod. "A lot has changed since I last worked in such a dynamic environment, but it's truly exciting." "Great to hear," Sarah said. "I'm glad you're enjoying it. Thomas will show you our current development, and then we'll gather to discuss one of our new projects." George continued the tour with Thomas, who led him to a spacious meeting room with walls covered in charts, diagrams, and sketches. "This is our new platform," Thomas began, pointing to one of the diagrams. "We've been developing it for several months, and the project is now in the testing phase. The main idea is to offer users more flexible tools for managing their data." George listened carefully, immersing himself in the technical details. Although the terminology was different from what he was used to, he quickly grasped the main concept. He asked a few questions to clarify certain points, and Thomas, to his surprise, found that George was quick to understand the core ideas. After the explanation, Thomas seated George at one of the computers so he could see the platform in action. George explored the interface and functionality, trying out the various features that Thomas demonstrated. He appreciated the intuitive nature of the system, but noticed a few areas for potential improvement that could make the product even more user-friendly. "This is an impressive development, Thomas," George said after they finished the demonstration. "I can see the amount of effort that's gone into this project. However, I think the interface could be made even more intuitive for less experienced users. Perhaps we should consider simplifying some elements." Thomas looked at George with surprise. He hadn't expected an intern, let alone a former CEO, to offer such specific and fundamentally useful suggestions. "That's a good point," Thomas admitted. "We've discussed some of these issues, but haven't yet reached a consensus. I'll definitely pass your ideas on to the team." George felt that he had taken the first step toward earning respect in this new environment. He knew there was still a lot of work ahead, but this small success inspired him. Later, at a team meeting, George's name came up again. Sarah introduced him as the newest member of the team and asked everyone to support him. The employees greeted him warmly, though George noticed a mix of curiosity in their eyes. He knew that many of them were surprised by his presence, but he also saw that some were open to his advice and help. At the end of the workday, George returned home with a sense of satisfaction. It had been a challenging day, full of new impressions and tasks, but he felt it was just the beginning. He was ready to continue learning, working, and proving that his experience and knowledge could still be valuable, even in a world that seemed so different from the one he once knew. Chapter 4. Clash of Generations. Weeks had passed since George began his internship at Sarah Jones's company. He gradually acclimated to the new pace of life, the abundance of digital tools, and the unique corporate culture, which was markedly different from what he was accustomed to. Despite his age and extensive experience, George knew he needed to learn on the go. But as in any new environment, friction was inevitable. One typical workday, Sarah invited George to a meeting to discuss an important project. It was an initiative to expand the platform's functionality, aiming to attract a broader audience and strengthen the company's market position. Sarah considered this project a priority, but George, based on his experience, saw certain risks. "I want to discuss our plan to implement new features," Sarah began as they settled into the conference room. "We have an ambitious goal, launching the update within 3 months. We believe this will significantly expand our market share." George listened intently, furrowing his brow in thought. "Sarah, I understand you want to move quickly, and that's commendable," he began, choosing his words carefully. "But I see certain risks in this plan. If we rush the implementation without proper testing, it could lead to quality issues and negative feedback from users. I would suggest revisiting the timeline and focusing more on testing and feedback." Sarah frowned. She didn't like that George was questioning her plan, especially in front of other team members who were also present at the meeting. "George, I understand your concerns," she replied, trying to maintain a neutral tone. "But we operate in a rapidly changing market, and if we don't act quickly, competitors could outpace us. We need to stay ahead, not slow down the process." Her tone wasn't harsh, but George could sense the underlying tension. He understood that in Sarah's eyes, his suggestions might seem overly cautious, perhaps too cautious for the fast-paced modern market. But he also knew that hasty decisions could lead to regrettable consequences. "I agree that speed is important," George said, trying to soften his words. "But the quality of the product is what keeps customers coming back in the long run. We can win the race but lose user trust if we're not careful." Sarah paused, contemplating his words. A tense silence filled the room. The other team members sensed the brewing conflict but hesitated to intervene. "I appreciate your experience and your concern for the company," Sarah finally said. "But I believe the risk is justified in this situation. We can intensify testing efforts concurrently, but the deadlines will remain unchanged." George realized it wasn't the right time to push further. He nodded in agreement, though inside he felt a growing sense of unease. He understood that their approaches differed, and this could become a source of future conflict. After the meeting, George returned to his desk, reflecting on what had transpired. It was clear to him that despite his experience, decisions were made differently in this company. The younger generation, which had grown up in an era of rapid change and fierce competition, valued speed and agility, qualities that often clashed with the methodical and cautious approach George was used to. However, he wasn't about to give up. George resolved to prove that his approaches and ideas were still relevant, even in this new world. He also realized that he needed to better understand his younger colleagues and find a way to convey his thoughts without causing confrontation. That evening at home, George shared the day's events with Rebecca. As always, she listened carefully, offering encouragement and support. "George, "You've always been cautious and measured in your decisions," she said, "but maybe you need to approach this from a different angle. Find a way to show Sarah that your experience can complement her ideas, not contradict them." Her words made George pause and reflect. He realized that this was more than just a work disagreement. It was a generational clash, a difference in perspectives on business and life. And if he wanted to succeed in this company, he needed to learn how to find compromises and build bridges, not walls. Chapter 5. The First Victory. Days in the company continued as usual, and despite the occasional tension, George didn't back down. He carefully monitored the projects he was involved in and continued to offer suggestions, even if they didn't always receive the response he hoped for. Nevertheless, his experience and intuition kept telling him that the moment for his second wind would come. One morning, Sarah called an emergency meeting. Something urgent seemed to require the entire team's attention. George took his seat in the conference room and noticed the tense atmosphere. "We're facing a serious problem," Sarah began as soon as everyone was gathered. "Our competitors have launched a similar product with features we were planning to implement. This could take away a significant portion of our market share if we don't find a way to respond quickly." The room buzzed with conversation. The tension among the team members was palpable as everyone tried to figure out the best course of action. George listened carefully without interrupting. He knew this was a crucial moment that could significantly impact the company's future. At some point, an idea came to him, one that could potentially solve the problem. "Sarah," George said as the discussions began to quiet down, "I think we have an opportunity not just to compete with them, but to surpass them. I suggest we consider a strategy that once helped my company win a similar race." All eyes turned to him, and Sarah, though surprised, listened attentively. "What do you have in mind, George?" she asked, hiding her skepticism. "I suggest we enhance our product's functionality by integrating additional services," George began to explain. "We can partner with other popular services that our customers already use. This will allow them to have a more comprehensive solution without changing their familiar tools. Yes, this will require additional resources and time, but in the long run, it will make our product more appealing to users." Sarah pondered his words. George's idea was risky, but she saw potential in it. She knew time was working against them, but she also understood that they needed not just to respond, but to outpace their competitors. "This could work," she finally said. "If we can quickly establish partnerships with other services, it could give us a significant advantage. Who wants to take the lead on implementing this idea?" George felt the long-forgotten fire of excitement ignite within him. He knew this was his chance to prove that he could still contribute and play a vital role in the company's success. "I'll take charge of coordinating the project," he said firmly. "I have the contacts and negotiation experience that will help us secure the necessary partnerships. We can do this quickly if we act decisively." Sarah nodded, agreeing with his proposal. "All right, George, we're trusting you with this project. You have all the resources you need, and I'm counting on your success." The meeting ended, and George dove into the work with an enthusiasm he hadn't felt in years. He knew that this time, his reputation and the company's future were at stake. He started by reconnecting with old contacts, establishing relationships with potential partners, and developing a plan to integrate the new services into the platform. The project turned out to be more challenging than he had anticipated. There were moments when George doubted his abilities, but the support of the team and his determination kept him going. He worked day and night, held endless meetings and negotiations, and meticulously checked every detail to ensure everything was on track. Weeks passed, and finally the day arrived when the enhanced product was ready for launch. Sarah and the rest of the team eagerly awaited the results. Everyone was on edge, but George felt confident. He knew they had done everything possible to make this project a success. The launch was a resounding success. Customer feedback was overwhelmingly positive, and it quickly became clear that they had not only caught up with, but surpassed their competitors. The new functionality was so well received that platform sales soared in the first few days after the update. George felt that his efforts had finally paid off. Sarah came to his office shortly after the results were announced. She was clearly impressed and grateful for his work. "George, I want to thank you for this incredible contribution," she said, smiling sincerely. "Thanks to you, we didn't just maintain our position, but strengthened it. It was an excellent idea, and you executed it brilliantly. George smiled back, feeling warmth from her words. Thank you, Sarah, he replied. I'm glad I could help. It was indeed a challenging project, but I'm proud that we succeeded together. This victory was a significant milestone for George. He had not only proven to himself and the team that his experience was still valuable, but he had also regained his confidence that his place was here, in this new and exciting world of business. Chapter 6. The Other Side of Success. After the successful completion of the project, George Michaels found himself at the center of attention within the company. His ideas and experience had helped the team achieve significant success, and his authority within the team had grown. However, despite the external success, George began to feel a growing sense of fatigue and anxiety. For the first time in a long while, he started to doubt whether he could keep up with the pace and pressure that accompanied the daily work in this dynamic startup. One evening, after another long day at work, George felt an overwhelming physical and emotional exhaustion. He sat down in his favorite armchair and closed his eyes, trying to find some peace and solace. But thoughts about upcoming tasks, responsibilities, and new projects wouldn't let him relax. You look tired, George, Rebecca said, observing him from the side. She approached him and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. You've been working too much. Maybe you should take a short vacation. Vacation? George opened his eyes and smiled weakly. I just started this new chapter in my life, and I already feel worn out. I can't just leave now, not when there's so much at stake. Rebecca sat down next to him, took his hand, and looked into his eyes. I understand how important this is to you, she said softly. But you can't forget about yourself. You're not getting any younger, and this kind of stress could be too much for you. I see how you're wearing yourself out, and it worries me. George knew Rebecca was right. He felt his body growing weary, and his spirit starting to break under the constant pressure. He increasingly felt that he had put too much ambition into proving his worth. But at the same time, he didn't want to admit defeat. I just want to show that I'm still capable of so much, George confessed. Maybe I've set the bar too high, but it's important to me to prove that my experience and knowledge still matter. Rebecca nodded, understanding his state of mind. No one doubts your abilities, George, she said, but you need to take care of yourself. You have to find a balance between work and rest. Otherwise, you risk losing everything you've achieved. Her words hit George hard. He realized that perhaps he had become too caught up in his desire to prove his worth. But at the same time, he felt that he simply couldn't allow himself to stop. The next day, George arrived at the office with heavy thoughts. He tried to stay upbeat and actively participate in discussions, but his mind kept returning to Rebecca's words. He began to notice that his concentration was slipping, and making decisions was becoming increasingly difficult. His knees ached, and he found himself thinking more and more about taking a break, but his sense of responsibility wouldn't let him do it. During another team meeting, George felt himself losing the thread of the conversation. He realized he was just sitting there, staring at the screen without really engaging in the discussion. Suddenly, Sarah approached him. George, are you all right? She asked quietly, noticing his absence from the conversation. George sighed and nodded. Yes, I'm just a bit tired, he admitted, though his voice lacked the confidence he wished it had. Sarah looked at him carefully. You've done so much for the company over the past few months, she said with genuine concern in her voice. Maybe you really should take a few days off. I can see that you're overwhelmed, and it's starting to take its toll on you. George felt the same anxiety he had felt at home. He knew Sarah was right, but the thought of stepping away from work, even for a short time, filled him with unease. I'll think about it, Sarah, he replied. Maybe you're right. Sarah nodded and smiled. We'll manage here without you if you decide to take a break. Your health is more important than anything. These words made George seriously consider his options. He realized that perhaps it was indeed time to listen to his body and soul. After working for a few more hours, he decided he would spend the evening reflecting on what the best course of action would be. When George returned home, he met Rebecca with a determined look in his eyes. I've decided, he said, embracing her. I'm going to take a few days off. I need to recharge so I can return to work with renewed energy. Rebecca smiled, feeling relieved. That's the right decision, George, she said. We can spend time together, relax, and regain our strength. I'm sure it will do you good." George knew this was a temporary step back, but he also understood that sometimes you need to stop to take the next step forward. He had to find a new balance between work and personal life so that he could continue moving forward with full dedication. Chapter 7. Building Trust. George spent several days in peace and solitude, allowing himself to forget about work and focus on recovering his strength. He and Rebecca went to their country house, where they could enjoy the tranquility of nature and spend time away from the hustle and bustle. These days were a balm for George's soul. He felt the tension and fatigue leaving him, his thoughts becoming clear and focused. On the third day of his rest, George received a message from Sarah. She wanted to know how he was feeling and suggested meeting if he felt up to it. George hadn't expected such attention, and it touched him. He decided he was ready to return to work, but this time with a new approach, one that paid more attention to his own needs. On his first day back at the office, George noticed that the atmosphere around him had changed. Colleagues greeted him with warmth and interest, many asking about his well-being and how he spent his time. George felt truly valued, and this gave him strength. Sarah invited him to her office to discuss current matters. She looked relaxed and friendly, which immediately created a comfortable atmosphere for their conversation. "George, I'm glad you're back," she said with a smile. "How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you," George replied gratefully. "The rest did me a lot of good. I realized that sometimes you need to pause and reflect to move forward." Sarah nodded. "I understand," she said. "We're all under a lot of stress and pressure here, especially when the company's success is on the line. But I'm glad you found time for yourself. It's important not only for you, but for the whole team." "You're right, Sarah," George agreed. "I think that in our drive for success, we sometimes forget about ourselves and our health. I'm grateful to you for your understanding and support." Sarah paused for a moment before unexpectedly sharing her thoughts. "You know, George," she began, "when you first came here, I was a bit skeptical. I thought our approaches were too different, that there was too much of a gap between our experiences and generations. But now I realize that your presence here has changed my perspective on many things." George looked at her in surprise. "In what way?" he asked, trying to understand what she meant. "I've learned that you can learn a lot not just from your peers, but from those who have walked a long path, like you," Sarah said. "Your ideas and approaches help us see things from a different angle, and that's invaluable. I see how the team has grown and developed, thanks to your experience. And now I understand that we all need to trust each other more." These words touched George deeply. He realized that his efforts had not been in vain, and that he had indeed become a valuable member of the team. For the first time in a long while, he felt he had achieved not only professional success, but also personal fulfillment. "Thank you, Sarah," he said quietly. "Your words mean a lot to me. I came here to learn something new and share what I know, and I'm glad we were able to find common ground." "I'm glad you're here too," Sarah replied. "Let's continue working together on our projects and make our company even stronger." In the following weeks, work continued, but the office atmosphere became more harmonious. George and Sarah began working more closely together, discussing new ideas and plans. They started trusting each other more, and it showed in the results. The team saw how their collaboration was bearing fruit, and it inspired everyone to achieve even more. One evening, after a long and productive day, Sarah invited George to dinner. They chose a cozy restaurant near the office, where they could calmly discuss not just work, but also personal matters. George felt that their communication had reached a new level, strengthening their professional relationship. Over dinner, they talked about many things: life, business, and how each of them had come to their current position. Sarah shared her dreams and plans for the future, while George spoke about his challenges and how he had been searching for new meaning in life after retirement. "I feel like I found what I was looking for," George admitted, looking into Sarah's eyes. "Working here has given me the second wind I never even dreamed of." Sarah smiled in response. "And you've helped me realize that sometimes you need to stop and look back to move forward," she said. "I think we've both learned a lot during this time. And this is just the beginning." These words felt like confirmation that they had found a common path. Their partnership had become the foundation for a new phase in the company's development. where mutual trust and support played a key role. George returned home that evening with a sense of satisfaction and gratitude for the second chance life had given him. He understood that there was still much work ahead, but now he was confident that he could face any challenge, knowing that there were people around him who valued and respected him. Chapter 8. A True Partnership. With each passing day, George felt more and more integrated into the young and energetic team. After the dinner with Sarah, their professional and personal relationship grew stronger, positively affecting the work process. Together, they had become not just colleagues, but true partners who trusted each other and shared common goals. However, soon the team faced a new challenge. The competitors they had been battling for the past few months were once again a step ahead, launching an innovative solution that threatened to overshadow Sarah's company's success. This created new tension and anxiety among the employees. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Sarah called George to an urgent meeting. They sat alone in the conference room, tensely discussing possible strategies. "We can't afford to miss this opportunity, George," Sarah said, nervously flipping through the papers on the table. "If we don't find a way to respond, our market position could be seriously undermined." George thought carefully, looking at the plans and charts spread before them. "Sarah, I think it's time for some radical measures," he began. "We could play on their turf, but with a different approach. If we offer something unexpected and unique, it might turn the situation in our favor." Sarah listened attentively, though her anxiety was evident. "What are you thinking?" she asked, clearly hoping for an unconventional solution. "I'm thinking about a partnership," George replied. "We could collaborate with another company that already has the technology or resources we need, and together create a product that isn't just competitive, but revolutionary." Sarah squinted, considering his proposal. "Partnership? But with whom? And how quickly can we organize this?" She asked the questions that had been on her mind. George smiled, feeling the strategist's excitement stirring within him. "I have a few ideas," he said. "There are a few companies working on similar solutions, but they haven't yet achieved significant success. If we offer them collaboration, they might see this as a chance to take things to the next level, and we'll gain the resources and technology we need." Sarah thought for a moment, mulling over his words. She knew George had used similar strategies in the past, often leading to success. "All right," she finally said, nodding decisively. "Let's give it a try. Where do we start?" George suggested starting with negotiations with one of the companies he had known and respected for their innovative approach. He contacted their management and arranged a meeting where they discussed the potential partnership. The negotiations were tough, but George knew how to convince people of the potential success of their joint efforts. Sarah also played an active role in the negotiations, offering her ideas and vision for the future product. In the end, they managed to reach an agreement, and the partnership was established. This was an important step that changed the entire company's strategy. Together with the new team, they set to work on developing a product that promised to be truly revolutionary in the market. The work was intense but coordinated, and George felt his knowledge and experience were indeed helping the team move forward. Sarah began to rely more on his advice, seeing him not just as a senior colleague, but as an equal partner. Soon the day arrived when they were ready to present their product to the public. It was a significant event that could change not only their future, but also the entire market. Sarah and George stood together on stage, preparing for the presentation. "I'm glad we walked this path together, George," Sarah said, smiling. "Without you, this wouldn't have been possible." George nodded, feeling satisfaction that their efforts were finally about to bear fruit. "I'm glad we succeeded," he replied, "and I'm sure this is just the beginning. Together, we can achieve even more." The presentation was a resounding success. The new product garnered rave reviews, and within days it became clear that they had not only caught up to, but surpassed their competitors. Their partnership proved to be more than successful, bringing not only material, but also moral rewards. At that moment, George realized he had found his place in life, where his experience, wisdom, and drive for new heights were once again in demand. He no longer doubted his abilities and knew that there were still many exciting and meaningful challenges ahead. Chapter 9. A New Outlook on Life. Months had passed since Sarah and George's company launched their revolutionary product. The success exceeded all expectations. Sales were increasing daily, and positive customer reviews filled the team with pride and inspiration. The office was filled with a sense of triumph and satisfaction from the work they had done. But for George, this success was not just a professional achievement. It changed his personal outlook on life. After a long day at work, George sat in his office, reflecting on recent events. He remembered the moment he first decided to re-enter the business world as an intern, full of doubts and uncertainty. Now, after all this time, he felt that he had found new meaning in life. But this meaning was not just in professional successes, but in how he had learned to appreciate every moment, every interaction with colleagues and loved ones. One evening, when he returned home, Rebecca noticed that he looked more relaxed and content than ever before. "You look happy, George," she said, smiling. "It seems like going back to work has truly made you a different person." George thoughtfully nodded, sitting next to her on the couch. "You know, Rebecca, I thought the whole point was to prove something to myself, to show that I could still be useful," he began. "But now I realize that the most important thing is how I've learned to appreciate each day and the people around me. Work has given me not only a second wind, but a new perspective on life." Rebecca gently stroked his hand, understanding everything he had been through in these past months. "You've always been someone who strives for new heights, George," she said. "But it seems like now you've found something more than just success. And that's wonderful." George smiled, feeling warmth spread through his heart. "I've realized that life isn't just about achievements. It's about how we live each day, how we treat those around us, and how we find joy in the little things," he said. "These months have taught me to be more patient, more open, and most importantly, more grateful for what I have." The next day at the office, George noticed that relationships within the team had become even more friendly and cohesive. People began to turn to him more often, not only for advice, but also for support, knowing that he would always make time for a conversation. His experience and wisdom became the foundation for forming a new corporate culture based on mutual understanding and support. Sarah had also changed. She had become more calm and confident, knowing that she could rely on George not just as a colleague, but as a mentor and friend. Their partnership had strengthened, and now they were planning new projects together, each of which brought not only professional, but also personal satisfaction. One day, when the office was bustling with activity, Sarah approached George with an unexpected proposal. "George," she began, smiling, "we've accomplished so much in the past few months, but I have an idea of how we can further strengthen our team and create something truly unique. I want to offer you the opportunity to become my official partner in the company." George was surprised, but a spark of excitement lit up in his eyes. "A partner?" he repeated, trying to comprehend her offer. "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "You've become an integral part of our success. Your wisdom, your experience, they're what make us stronger. I want you to continue working with me, not just as a consultant, but as an equal partner." George thought for a moment. This offer meant more to him than just a new professional role. It was a recognition that his efforts had been appreciated and that he had indeed found his place in life. "I agree," he finally said, feeling deep satisfaction. "It would be an honor." Sarah smiled, knowing they had just opened a new chapter in the company's history. Months passed, and George continued to work with the same energy and enthusiasm as he had at the beginning of his internship. But now he did so with a new awareness. Life is not just about achievements and success, but about how we spend each day, how we learn from others, and how we make the world a little better. His second chance, his second wind, had become not just an opportunity to return to business, but a chance to find new meaning in life, rethink his values, and discover new horizons. Chapter 10. The End of the Journey. The day had come when George Michaels realized that his internship at the company was drawing to a close. It was a strange feeling, a mix of satisfaction with the work he had done and a slight sadness at the impending change. He had always known this moment would come, but now, as it approached, George felt he was leaving behind more than just a successful project or a business partnership. The company that had once welcomed him as an intern had now become a place where he had rediscovered himself. He had seen his colleague grow, witnessed Sarah's transformation, and together they had turned the startup into a formidable player in the market. And although his official role was coming to an end, George knew that his contributions would remain here forever. On his final day, Sarah invited the entire team to a small farewell gathering in the conference room. The atmosphere was warm and friendly, despite the slight sadness everyone felt, knowing that George was leaving. Sarah stood up to give a speech, and all eyes turned to her. "Today is a special day," she began. "We're saying goodbye to George, who has become not just a colleague, but a mentor, a friend, partner. Over the past months, he has helped us reach new heights. But more importantly, he has made us a better team. And while his official internship is ending, his impact on our company will stay with us forever." George listened attentively, trying not to show how deeply her words moved him. He had always prided himself on his work and efforts being recognized, but now he felt something more: deep gratitude for having found a new purpose in life. "George," Sarah continued, addressing him directly, "from the bottom of my heart, thank you for everything you've done for us. You've given us not just knowledge and experience, but you've shown us what it means to be a true professional and a human being. I want you to know that the doors of this company are always open to you, and we hope you'll continue to be a part of our team." The room filled with applause. George stood up and smiled, feeling tears welling up in his eyes. He had never been one to easily show emotion, but now he felt this was the moment to be genuine. "Thank you, Sarah," he began as the applause died down. "Thank you to all of you. I came here to find new meaning in life, and I found so much more than I expected. You've given me not just a second chance, but the opportunity to be part of something great. I will never forget these months and the people I've been fortunate enough to work with." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I don't plan to completely disappear from your lives," he continued, eliciting smiles from his colleagues. "I'll always be around, ready to offer advice or support in tough times. But now it's time to step aside and let the younger generation take the lead and continue the journey we've started together." After his words, the room erupted in applause again. It was a simple but touching farewell, reflecting all that George had meant to this company. Later, after everyone had left, George stayed alone with Sarah in the conference room. They stood by the window, looking out at the city, which was gradually lighting up as evening approached. "George," Sarah said quietly, "you've changed my life. I've learned so much from you, and it will stay with me forever." "And I've learned a lot from you, Sarah," George replied warmly. "You've shown me that it's never too late to start something new, and that life is full of surprises if we're willing to embrace them." They stood in silence, savoring the moment. "This isn't the end," George said, smiling. "It's just a new chapter, for all of us." Sarah nodded in agreement. "Yes," she said, "a new chapter." They exchanged one last warm glance, knowing that the future held many more exciting things, but confident that each of them had walked an important path that had changed them both. George left the office feeling light and content. He knew his mission was accomplished, and the future held new challenges and opportunities. But most importantly, he knew he had found himself and his place in this new, fast-changing world. Life went on, and George was ready for any new twists of fate, knowing that every moment mattered and that it was never too late to start with a blank page. The end. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel and don't forget to hit the like button. Thank you for your attention.